They would schedule additional dates on the same day since they were aware of my mental state. To get the upfront money in, they would take me somewhere else, and they made me appear much worse than the dates I missed, which I did miss a lot of. He was Heartbreak's voice. However, George Jones was concealing a storm of animosity behind the scenes. The country music icon remained silent for decades about the celebrities that betrayed him, or simply annoyed him. The truth has now surfaced, long after the curtain has fallen. George Jones couldn't stand any of these 7 vocalists. You might be shocked by some of the names. Paycheck Johnny. George Jones and Johnny Paycheck never had a classic competition in their relationship. Rather, it was a complex, intensely emotional relationship that wavered between friendship, disappointment, and sincere sorrow. Paycheck, whose real name was Donald Eugene Liedl, had previously played bass and provided backing vocals for Jones's band. He looked up to Jones during those formative years, taking in his phrasing, stage presence, and unfiltered, passionate vocal style. The similarities between Paycheck's and Jones's vocal delivery were no accident. Paycheck was frequently referred to as Jones's protege. With songs like Take This Job and Shove It, Paycheck established himself as a major force in outlaw country music as his solo career took off. But stability was not a result of fame. Many in the industry subsequently turned against Paycheck due to his decline into substance addiction, unpredictable conduct, and a series of legal issues, including a jail sentence for shooting a man during a bar fight. Jones, who suffered from addiction and self-destruction himself, was all too familiar with Paycheck's struggles. Their bond was frequently strained, despite the fact that they faced similar challenges. Missed chances, personal setbacks, and the crippling weight of addiction caused tensions to boil beneath the surface even if there was no dramatic physical incident between them. Jones, who had just managed to pull himself back from the edge of his own life, seemed helpless to stop Paycheck as he followed the same sinister course. Nevertheless, George Jones never abandoned Paycheck despite the challenges. Jones took over when his legal woes and health problems finally caused him to lose his job, leaving him penniless and alone. In one of the most revealing displays of kindness in the history of country music, Jones publicly supported Paycheck by holding a press conference at his house. Jones supported his old friend when many had written him off. George Jones once more behaved as family rather than as a distant old coworker when Paycheck died almost penniless in 2003. He made sure his former bandmate had a dignified send-off by covering the cost of the funeral. More was stated by this gesture of loyalty and charity than by any song or interview. In subsequent interviews, Jones stated, "I loved Johnny Paycheck and wished I could have helped him more." That one statement captures a mixture of grief, annoyance, and enduring love. Theirs was not a tale of betrayal, competition, or anger. It was the agonizing tale of 2 guys who resembled one another too much and whose shared struggles with addiction created a tragic yet enduring bond. Billy Sherrill. One of the most influential and, unfortunately, most tense collaborations in country music history was that between George Jones and producer Billy Sherrill. In theory, Sherrill saved Jones's career at a pivotal juncture in its downfall. Jones was in a downward spiral by the late 1970s as a result of years of substance abuse, poor money management, and untrustworthy work. The challenge of controlling the mayhem and bringing Jones back into the spotlight fell to Sherrill, who was already well known for creating the smooth, choreographed country politan sound that helped musicians like Tammy Wynette and Charlie Rich achieve crossover success. There was a price for the musical renaissance that ensued. He Stopped Loving Her Today, their most famous joint effort, is considered the best country ballad of all time and became Jones's hallmark tune. At first, however, Jones detested it. During recording, he dragged his feet and struggled through sessions interrupted by his drug and alcohol usage. He reportedly snapped, "Nobody will buy that morbid son of a bitch." He scoffed at the theatrical arrangement and the melancholy theme. It took more than a year to record the song, during which time Jones either failed to appear at all or slurred lyrics or missed cues. As a pop-savvy perfectionist, Cheryl had to convince Jones to finish the song by splicing together usable takes. The two guys were frequently at odds behind the scenes. Jones, who defended the integrity of honky-tonk and classic country music, was annoyed by Cheryl's emotional manipulation and symphonic layering. Jones preferred a raw, minimalist style, which contrasted with the country-politan sound. Slick production, background choirs, and luxurious strings. He believed that in order to appeal to the general public, his musical essence was being polished away. In private, Jones felt that a lot of Cheryl's aesthetic was a violation of his artistic heritage. For his part, Cheryl acknowledged that the relationship wasn't simple. He complained about Jones's unpredictable actions in interviews. Jones refused to be scheduled, he said, and would show up whenever he wanted or not at all. When asked about Jones's reluctance to follow traditional studio procedures, Cheryl once joked, "I hated that too." The producer was faced with not only Jones's problems, but also the singer's insistence on doing things his own way and at his own pace. The outcomes were self-evident notwithstanding the strain. He brought Jones into a new period of respect and renown, won him a Grammy, revived his chart success, and ended his love affair with her today. Both men were aware of the irony. The song Jones had scorned became his masterpiece, and the producer he privately loathed became the creator of his most enduring legacy. Nevertheless, Jones harbored a subtle resentment against the partnership beneath the praise and the radio singles. Although he appreciated Cheryl's skill and contributions, he was irritated by the producer's manipulation of his voice. Cheryl's studio techniques felt intrusive and manufactured to a fiercely independent artist. A sense of creative compromise, a deal with the very institution he frequently attempted to challenge, accompanied the resurgence of his career. Jennings, Juan. One of the most bizarre stories in country music history sums up the mayhem that surrounded George Jones in his lowest points. In this notorious event, Jones, who was struggling with drug and alcohol addiction, unexpectedly showed up at the house of fellow outlaw country artist Juan Jennings. Neither guy would soon forget the bizarre, almost humorous night that ensued, which was filled with uncertainty, devastation, and a literal attempt at self-control. Both artists were struggling with addiction at the time of the event. Jones was notorious for missing gigs, going on benders, and acting erratically, but he was especially far down his spiral. This time, drunk and confused, Jones showed up at Juan's house out of the blue, hardly able to stand or talk. The inebriated Jones started causing mayhem, knocking things over, yelling gibberish, and finally lashing out at Juan himself, mistaking Jennings's generosity for something more aggressive. Not a stranger to roughhousing, but also not one to put up with inappropriate behavior. Jennings's response was unexpected. George Jones was bound to the ground by him. Juan forcefully detained his rowdy visitor with the assistance of his wife Jessie Coulter and other household members in order to stop additional harm from being done to the house or to George. It was an act of sheer frustration rather than malice. Even the monarch of outlaw country, George No-Show Jones, had gone too crazy at that point. Interestingly, neither man was bitter. In fact, rather than remembering the night with resentment, Jones and Jennings would both laugh about it in subsequent interviews. Always quick with a wry remark, Jennings said that attempting to control Jones was like trying to wrestle a greasy hog. Once sober, George was known to chuckle about the experience, seeing it as just another mishap in a long line of mishaps. Crucially, the argument was never about rivalry, ego, or jealousy in the workplace. Although their audiences, techniques, and images overlapped, both men were titans of their own genres. Jones continued to be the high priest of heartfelt ballads and classic heartache songs, while Jennings was spearheading the outlaw country trend and rebelling against the Nashville machine. Their paths collided in the shared battleground of substance abuse, which cost both men years and almost their lives, rather than in the studio or on-stage rivalry. This strange story demonstrates the extent to which Jones's addiction impacted both his professional and interpersonal connections. Although his erratic conduct and missed shows were the cause of many of his professional issues, His encounters with pals like Juan demonstrate that his behavior could become unbearable even among those who sympathized with his suffering. It says volumes about how out of control things had gotten that Jennings, who was no angel at the time, had to physically restrain Jones. Haggard, Merle Haggard and George Jones, two of the best voices in country music, had a profound artistic appreciation for one another, which resulted in some unforgettable partnerships. Many people characterize them as musical soulmates, heartache ballad masters, hard Scrabble kids, and people with strong ties to traditional country traditions. However, behind the scenes, their personal and professional relationship was far more complex than their duets, which suggested perfect harmony. Haggard, always the professional and craftsman, was frequently frustrated by Jones's propensity for self-destruction. When the two organized a joint tour that was meant to be a historic combination of country royalty in the early 1980s, their first significant conflicts emerged. Although fans were thrilled, Merle soon encountered an issue that had beset Jones's previous partners. George just refused to appear. Haggard's reflections on the experience were candid. Merle stated in subsequent interviews, such as an open discussion with NPR in 2006, George would prefer to be intoxicated than to be a celebrity. It was a harsh but truthful evaluation that came from disappointment rather than animosity. Merle, who once called Jones the best country singer in history, had admired him since he was a young boy. However, such respect was insufficient to protect him from the fact that he would have to deal with Jones's unpredictable, intoxicated conduct. Jones's infamous unreliability surfaced as they tried to plan recording sessions and practice for performances. He would be too drunk to perform, arrive late, or vanish without a trace. At times, he failed to appear. This conduct was frustrating to Haggard, who was always meticulous and disciplined in his approach to his trade. According to reports, he was furious behind closed doors and even contemplated withdrawing from their initiatives completely. However, their friendship managed to persist, which is a credit to the emotional complexity of both men. Merle never really left Jones, even in the years when, as Haggard described it, his actions drove everyone insane. Perhaps since Haggard himself struggled with issues like drug addiction and jail time as a young man, there was a profound empathy behind the rage. He was aware of what it was like to be broken and understood that George's agony and his genius drew from the same well. Later on, their reconciliation was more than just a personal one. It had a melodic quality. Long after Jones had calmed down, the two icons got back together for the duet album, Kicking Out the Footlights Again in 2006. Haggard's songs were covered by Jones and vice versa in a nostalgic and melancholy endeavor. The record was more than just a business endeavor. It was a subdued homage to the complex relationship they had enjoyed for many years. Haggard was thoughtful in the interviews and sleeve notes for the record. His voice had changed from one of rage to one of wonder and sorrow. However, he also said that being near Jones at the height of his addiction was a nightmare, even for those who loved him. There was nobody like George, he remarked, and there never will be. Their connection, characterized by mutual admiration, artistic synergy, and personal tension, is among the most captivating in the history of country music. Despite his frustration with Jones's shortcomings, Haggard never lost faith in his brilliance. And ultimately, their shared music continues to stand as a monument to their friendship and the difficulties they faced apart. G. Brooks. Despite this, George Jones and G never had a personal conflict. According to Brooks, the conflict between them was a sign of a wider ideological and generational divide in country music. A significant change was occurring in the genre by the 1990s. G. Brooks became the face of a new genre of country music that combined polished pop hooks with rock spectacle because to his explosive intensity, arena-sized performances, and crossover appeal. Jones and other traditionalists did not see this change as evolution. Erosion was the cause. Jones, who is sometimes praised as the best vocalist in the history of country music, established his reputation with straightforward, heartfelt ballads that encapsulated the simplicity and unadulterated suffering of people. In his opinion, Country music is a spiritual institution that is based on heartache and narrative rather than pyrotechnics, staged shows, or commercial flash. G, however, introduced country music to MTV and arenas. He increased its size, volume, and gloss. In interviews conducted in the 1990s, Jones voiced his increasing dissatisfaction with the way traditional country musicians were being replaced by more contemporary, financially successful performers. Although he never explicitly called Brooks by name, it was clear from his comments who he was talking about. Jones bemoaned in a 1999 Rolling Stone interview, "They're turning country into something I don't recognize anymore. It's more about the show than the song." He specifically took issue with the practice of artists employing pop-style vocals, elaborate light shows, and headset microphones, all of which are characteristics of G's performances. When Gar Brooks recorded a tribute song called George Jones, it was the most intimate instance of their unsaid tension. Although it was a sincere attempt to pay tribute to Jones's contribution to the genre, the goodwill was undermined when Brooks's label, Capitol Records, declined to release the song on a commercial basis. Why? According to reports, they thought Jones's name and voice were unsuitable for radio. This was a deeply felt decision. Jones saw it as a metaphorical smack in the face because he was already feeling excluded by the industry he helped create. This was a tribute from the biggest country star of the time. However, because George's kind of country music was no longer deemed viable by the mainstream, the system would not let it. The irony hurt. Because he didn't match the slick modern image, a living legend was denied a place in a genre he had once defined. Jones held a quiet hurt over the episode, but he was too experienced and dignified to lash out in fury. He described it in private talks and subsequent interviews as an illustration of how conventional artists, regardless of their impact, were being thrown out like artifacts. Gar Brooks wasn't the only one involved. It has to do with the industry's changing morals and the declining regard for the status quo. G always treated Jones with respect, even in the face of conflict. He mentioned him as an inspiration and hero. And Brooks paid heartfelt homage to George when he died in 2013. Their unsaid tension, however, continues to be a powerful representation of the cultural gap between tradition and change, origins and reinvention in country music. It was not jealousy or pettiness that caused Jones to feel uneasy around Brooks. It was a purist's lamentable cries as he saw his favorite genre move more away from its core. Wynette Tammy. One of the most illustrious and tumultuous marriages in country music history was that of George Jones and Tammy Wynette. They collaborated to record classic duets like We're Going to Hold On and Golden Ring. The image of romantic joy is created by their voices melding in almost perfect unison. Behind the mics, however, their relationship was in disarray, characterized by emotional upheaval, addiction, and instability that would leave scars long after their divorce in 1975. Despite their intense and fast-paced relationship, Jones's increasing drinking and drug usage caused their marriage to fail very fast. Despite her best efforts to keep the marriage intact, Tammy, dubbed the First Lady of Country Music, had suffered years of mental turmoil by the middle of the 1970s. For Sarah and her kids, George's violent outbursts, unpredictable conduct, and frequent disappearances created a toxic environment. However, the drama continued after their divorce. Named after her most contentious hit, Tammy's autobiography, Stand By Your Man, was published in 1979. Fans were taken aback by the book's honest portrayals of her life with Jones. She detailed instances of physical abuse in its pages, including one in which George allegedly used a loaded rifle to follow her through their house. She described how his drunkenness changed him into a dangerous, harsh, and unpredictable person. In addition to being an addict, her narrative depicted George as having the capacity for terrifying cruelty. The book caused Jones great pain. I Live to Tell It All, his own memoir, 1996. He confronted the charges directly. Although he acknowledged that he had been a problematic spouse, he refuted many of Tammy's most damaging accusations, claiming that she had embellished and even made up events for dramatic effect. He wrote, She made it all sound worse than it was, expressing his shock and hurt at what he perceived to be a betrayal by someone he had once loved. For George, the book represented more than just their history. His legacy was irrevocably tarnished by the public censure. The distance between them grew as a result of the emotional impact from Stand By Your Man. For years, their only communication was through attorneys or public insults. Even though they were a successful professional team, they were deeply bitter, with each of them carrying hurt that the other never really acknowledged or resolved. George experienced an assault. Tammy felt left behind. Nevertheless, the two would reconcile musically in the 1990s, marking one of the most contradictory periods in the history of country music. They published the album One in 1995, which had songs that reflected on their past, including the moving tune Twotery House. At first glance, the project seemed to be a gesture of reconciliation. However, people who knew them well pointed out that the reunion was more business-related than personal. In interviews, they were polite and even loving, but the wounds were still there. George was devastated when Tammy Wynette passed away in 1998. She had been a defining factor in his life in spite of everything. He sobbed during her funeral and thereafter claimed that a piece of him had perished with her. Grief appeared to wash away any resentment he may have had toward her memoir or their difficult past. However, he never denied that Stand By Your Man had caused him great and unjust pain. Country music venue. George Jones was already a towering figure in country music by 1999. His songs were woven into the fabric of the genre, and his voice had defined sadness. Nevertheless, the industry he helped create was progressively displacing traditionalists in favor of younger, more commercially oriented performers, notwithstanding his legacy. At the 1999 Country Music Association CMA Awards, Jones's long-simmering discontent with Nashville's new course erupted into public protest, bringing that tension to a dramatic conclusion. George's poignant personal song, Choices, a melancholic reflection on mortality, addiction, and regret, was released that year. Widely acclaimed as a comeback, the song, which was honest and intensely personal, centered on Jones's decades-long battle with drugs and alcohol. It was regarded by many reviewers and devoted followers as one of his most emotionally stirring pieces in a long time. Jones was asked to perform it at the CMA's esteemed awards event, but there was a catch. Only a condensed version of it would be permitted. The request was blatantly offensive to Jones. In his opinion, it was a blow to both himself and the music he had always supported. It was inappropriate to remove such a sentimental song to make time, especially at a ceremony honoring the nation's finest. Infuriated, he refused to participate on the show and boycotted it completely. He would later remark, "They want George Jones to come and smile." However, George Jones's singing is not what people want to hear. There was more than one music included. It was about what Jones saw as the increasing disrespect for country music's forerunners. He felt that the industry was putting youth, financial success, and dazzling performances ahead of tradition, heart, and substance. For him, the choice to eliminate options became a metaphor for the greater trend of the nation's roots being erased from its most prominent stage. Then came the renowned act of protest by Alan Jackson's, scheduled to sing Pop Atop, his own smash song. Mid-performance, Jackson stunned the audience on the CMA broadcast. On live national television, in front of the top performers and executives in the nation, he abruptly signaled his band to change gears halfway through the song and launched into the chorus of Choices. The audience erupted in cheers and surprise. When Jones later viewed Jackson's homage, he was moved to tears by its short but impactful display of unity. It was a moment of validation for George. Even though he was still extremely offended by the CMA's ruling, Alan Jackson's gesture demonstrated that there were still musicians who supported and appreciated the status quo. Both appreciation and residual resentment were voiced by Jones in later interviews. "You give your life to something and they don't even want to let you finish your song," he said plainly. "I was insulted. The 1999 CMA event became a flashpoint that typified George Jones's ongoing struggle with the industry's changing standards and became a defining moment in his latter years. Even though he would still record and perform, his confidence in Nashville's leadership had been shattered, which strengthened his conviction that the essence of country music was being compromised for commercial gain and solidified his status as a legend and a rebellious voice for traditionalism. What do you think about the singers George Jones despises? Tell us in the space provided below. We sincerely hope you have found this video useful, and if you do, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for seeing, and we hope to see you in our next films.